Hi, welcome everyone, and welcome to our online version of the Active Living 101 class for the Edmonton Oliver Primary Care Network. My name is James Sauchin. I'm a kinesiologist working for the Primary Care Network, and I'm here to help you with this presentation. A few things about myself, though, before we get started off. So I do have my bachelor's degree in kinesiology, as well as I'm a clinical exercise physiologist certified through the American College of Sport Medicine. My role here at the clinic is to help people learn how to exercise, learn how to add physical activity into their lifestyle, sometimes to help manage a medical condition, or just understanding all of us do need to exercise if we want to keep our bodies strong, our hearts healthy, and all that good stuff. So today we're going to be talking a little bit about how our general activity that we do throughout the day, whether it's at work or at home or elsewhere, how it can play a very important role in managing our overall health condition. So on the agenda for today, we're going to talk about activity for a longer, healthier life. So understanding how adding this activity to our life can reduce our chances of premature death. How did we get here? So obviously we haven't had these troubles that we might have had now for the entire span of the human race's existence. So, how did we get to where we are today, and why are we noticing that there are some problems when we start thinking about our physical activity and the correlation with inactivity and some of our health risks that develop due to that? We'll talk a little bit about how exercise is not necessarily enough. So this isn't a plug to say not to exercise. Exercise is very important, but we're starting to learn, we used to have the mindset that maybe you could exercise for a half hour, an hour a day to kind of try to offset all the stuff you're doing, at work or at home or wherever we're not thinking about our posture so much potentially. So we'd go to the gym or we'd do some exercises at home to try to counteract all of that. What we're finding out is that essentially if you have a perfect workout for a half hour, an hour every single day, but you followed it up with 15 hours of basically sitting and not doing a heck of a lot of activity, you're going to have a lot of an uphill struggle trying to make any headway on any fitness goals or even combating some of your medical conditions. So starting to think a little bit more about not just the exercise that we're making the point of doing, but that general activity we get throughout the day being equally as important potentially. We'll talk a little bit about how to change your mindset, change your habits. Obviously, it's going to be a little hard just from words on the computer to change everything in your life. So how we can start thinking about a few of these concepts that we go over throughout this program today and how you can start implementing that into your lifestyle. And then we'll talk a little bit about, obviously, we do have to sit sometimes throughout the day, or you might have a job where you're forced to sit a lot longer than maybe we would like. So at the end of the day, when you are sitting, how we can maximize our musculature to maintain our posture and reduce a lot of that wear and tear that's happening on our spine and our hips when we're sitting for those prolonged periods of time. So before we get too deep into the presentation here, I'm going to start off with a nice video that kind of outlines everything that we're talking about today, and why what we're doing today and what we're talking about is so important for how we're going to feel tomorrow or in the future for ourselves.
What will your last 10 years look like? Will you be quick enough for a game of tag with your grandchild? Strong enough to embrace every moment? Will you grow old with vitality? Or get old with disease? It's time to decide. The average Canadian will spend their last 10 years in sickness. Change your future at makehealthlast.ca.
All right, so as I said, a nice short video that really hammers home the point of what we're talking about today. A lot of times when we start thinking about exercise or physical activity or the things we can start doing now that don't necessarily seem as pressing or as important as other aspects of our life, we start forgetting that, as we get older, a lot of this stuff will become harder. And the earlier that you can start working on making some changes with the physical activity in your lifestyle, the sooner you can start reaping some of the benefits of it. A lot of times when we're looking at two people who are 20 or 30 years old, earlier on in their lives, whether they're very fit or even quite unfit in terms of their day-to-day activities, they can do all the same stuff. They're not worried about, you're not really worried about if you can go up and down the stairs, if you're at a mall, you're not really worried about carrying groceries, opening jars, kind of all these day-to-day things that we don't necessarily think too much about until they maybe become a bit of a challenge for ourselves. When you start looking at people that are older, however, in their 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, that's where we start noticing a huge discrepancy between two different individuals. We'll have some people that are like one of the gentlemen in the videos that can take care of themselves. They're still bike riding, maybe they're golfing, they're enjoying all of the stuff they used to do. While on the other side of the coin, we might find some people that are actually quite reliant on everyone around them, or maybe they have to live in an assisted living home or somewhere like that because they can't necessarily take care of themselves 100% anymore. And then anyone kind of in between. So when we think about, how do we get to this stage in life, or how do these things happen, there are definitely some things that are out of our control. You can't really do anything about family history other than understand that it's there and it's something that will possibly affect you due to the family history. But we can't worry about those types of things too much because ultimately they're out of our control. What we want to focus our energy on is the things that we actually do have some semblance of control over. In this case, we'll be talking about the physical activity, and essentially you have the choice to become more active or not be more active. And at the end of the day, when you turn 90, how you feel at that point is going to be based off of a lot of the choices you made up to that point. So never too early, or it's never too late to start, but definitely the earlier you can get started on this stuff, the better. We can't do a lot about yesterday, but we can start doing things today that can help us feel better for tomorrow. So a large part of this presentation is based off of a book called Deskbound, Standing Up to a Sitting World. So I just have the information here for this book. For the sake of this presentation, we'll be predominantly just talking about our general activity throughout the day, a little bit about our activity at the workplace. If you have a lot of interest in what we're talking about today and you want to go a lot deeper into this topic, this is a great book to read, especially if you are setting up an office at home or if you have an office space at work that you think might not be quite ideal. This book actually goes into a little bit of information about how you might set up that office space for yourself to reduce some of the strain and the wear and tear that's happening in our bodies when we are having to sit or work at our computer for these prolonged periods of time. So next thing that we're going to go over, a little bit of a handout from the book itself that we put together to kind of outline some key points that are really important when we're thinking about, how do we engage our muscles properly to support our spine. So I'll just leave this up for a couple seconds. We should have copies available on our website that you could download, but if you haven't done that, you can take a quick peek at this, and then I'm going to actually be zooming out to a video and I'll be talking you through all of these points. All right, hello again. So we're going to just walk you through that slide we were just looking at. So if you were able to print off a copy from our website, take a peek at that handout, or if not, hopefully you're able to take a screenshot on the during this presentation just before I got to this point. If not, I'll leave it up again after this so you can have a quick peek at it again after I review the points for the standing sequence. So we're going to start off, we want to think about our feet first and work our way up to our head and our shoulders. So the first point on there is that we want to point our feet forward and then screw them into the ground outwardly. So what that's talking about, we want to think about our heels as the screw, so to speak. When we have our feet nice and straight forward like so, you can for 1 second even take your toe off the ground and just turn your foot outwardly. It's going to get some muscles in your hip starting to engage just to allow for that movement. When we are standing, I'm not going to try to get you to endlessly turn your feet out, so to speak. We do want to have them pointing forward, but you just want to think like you are initiating that motion at the hip, trying to turn my toes out or spread the floor apart with my toes if that's an easier cue. Pivoting on the heel and feeling those muscles around my butt muscles starting to engage at the base of our hips or our pelvis. So, and you can think about turning those feet out. Should feel this starting to clench a little bit. And it'll bring us to our next point, which is to squeeze your butt muscles. So for a second, you can squeeze those butt muscles as hard as you can, just to get a feel for what it should feel like to have these muscles engaging forcefully. When we think about movement or just standing tasks, you're not going to be clenching these muscles as hard as you can, so to speak. We actually can let them relax. We just want to engage them maybe about 10% or just like we're thinking about those muscles when we're standing. We're not forgetting about them. So just that light engagement there, it's going to help support our pelvis, which is at the base of our spine. Next point on there, we're going to start talking about how to get our abdominal muscles engaged to help support our lumbar spine a bit more. So the point there, we're going to take a big breath in. As you breathe that air out, we're just going to lightly start tightening up our abdominal muscles or tightening up our abdominal wall. A way you can feel that engagement or maybe frame your mind around it, try to imagine if you have your belly button right here in front of my hand, you're just trying to pull that belly button away from the hand or pull it towards your spine while you're still able to talk. If you can't breathe or talk or say anything when you're doing this, you're probably engaging your diaphragm fairly hard. For the sake of what we're doing right now, we're trying to differentiate between that and getting our abdominal muscles engaging properly. So again, take that big breath in, and then as the cue says, as you're exhaling, start tightening up that abdominal wall. Once you get a good feel for that, just like the butt muscles, let's contract that abdominal wall as hard as we can for a couple seconds, just to really feel that engagement. And then we can realize that when we're standing and starting to do other tasks, that we're just going to have a mild engagement here to support our spine while we go on to do other things. The next point on there is going to start talking about our mid-spine and our shoulders. So we're going to have our palms facing forward. Other thing you can do here to take it one step forward, have your palms facing forward right at your sides and even start turning your thumbs backwards or turning your palms out even more. Should start feeling a lot of those muscles around the shoulder socket start tightening up and making that shoulder socket feel a little bit more secure. You might also feel that you're starting to lift your chest and straighten up through the spine a little bit. So again, we can make this contraction as hard as we can for a couple seconds. We can really feel what it should feel like to get these muscles around the shoulders engaging properly to support our mid-spine. And then, just like the other cues, we can start thinking to ourselves that, okay, we have that contraction when we're thinking about it as for posture when we're doing our daily tasks. We don't need to clench these muscles, but we just want them engaging a little bit. And you'll even notice we can maintain that stability around the shoulder while we can move out our elbows. We could be typing, we could be doing our mouse work, whatever kind of computer stuff you might be doing throughout the day. The last point we want to think about is our neck or our cervical spine and our head and their position when we're thinking about our postures. So the last point there is that we want to try to pull our head back over top of our shoulders and our hips to kind of create a fairly straight alignment between the hips, the shoulders, and the head, all over top of the ankle as well. So with this one, it is potentially a little bit hard on the neck. If you find that it's quite a strain to pull your head back into that position, we're not saying that you need to, force it there and, no matter what, but we want to think to ourselves that we're thinking about what muscles you're using to start pulling your head back this way. So if we do have, a fairly forward lean with our posture with the neck for whatever reason, you didn't develop this overnight, so we're not going to fix it overnight just by getting those muscles engaging. But much like how this slowly started happening over many, 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 many years, we can slowly start going the other way if we start thinking about the muscles that are going to help with that engagement, help with pulling that head back over our shoulders, our hips, and ankles. So again, just to review all of these points, want to have our feet pointing fairly straight forward, think about our heels as the screw, want to screw our feet into the ground, turning our heel outwardly, going to squeeze our butt muscles to help assist with that, really help supporting that lower spine. Going to take that big breath in and out. As we're breathing out, just going to really tighten up that abdominal wall to help stabilize our lumbar spine or create that support. Next point that we're going to do, palms are going to be facing forward, hands at our sides. If you want to take it one step further, you can turn those thumbs backwards a little more just to feel that engagement in the shoulders a bit more. And then the last point on there, pulling that head up over our shoulders, our hips, and knees. So this can be a really good drill to run yourself through fairly often throughout the day, especially if you have been sitting for a little bit and you're not able to go for a workout or go for any large amount of exercise or anything like that. Just standing up, going through these cues can play a major role in one, improving your overall posture, as well as just helping us improve our ability to work longer, reduce aches and pains and things like that potentially. So yeah, take these points to heart. I can help out to put this handout wherever you might be sitting quite a bit. So in your office space or at home in your computer room, if that's where you're sitting. Otherwise, we're going to be diving right back into the slides after this. All right, so hopefully that gives you a good idea of what we want to be looking for when we're thinking about engaging these muscles around our spine, just to create that support from when we're standing and eventually going on to do other things. So the human body is built to last. The body's resting state is not supposed to be one of pain. I'm sure there's very few of you watching this that were born as a baby with a pain condition or a chronic pain condition. Generally, it's something that will develop over time. Our body adapts to the stresses, habits, and patterns that you place on it. So this includes the good and the bad habits. So that's the great news about today. No matter where you think you are today or how you feel about your fitness at this point, we can understand that moving forward from today, we can start doing things that are hopefully going to have a positive impact on improving our health. And that starts with thinking about some of the things we talk about today and starting to implement that into your lifestyle. So inactivity is changing your life, my life, and everyone else's. The World Health Organization rates physical inactivity as the fourth biggest preventable risk factor of early death globally. This comes after hypertension, high blood glucose levels or blood sugar levels, and tobacco use. I forget the exact order, but you'll notice that when we look at two of those leading causes, they are often symptoms or conditions that are highly correlated with inactivity on its own. So when we think about it, 3 out of the top 4 things seem to be linked to inactivity that are causing preventable early death. We spend about 3/4 of the healthcare budget treating conditions related to inactivity. So diabetes, obesity, heart disease, a lot of other conditions too that are correlated with our inactivity. So again, there are a lot of things that we don't have control over. Even looking at, this list, diabetes and heart disease are two things especially that, a person could have a genetic predisposition to. But ultimately, regardless of your own personal predisposition to a condition, the activity and the things and the choices that you choose to take or do are going to have a pretty positive impact on managing that condition if it's something that's unavoidable for you. A typical office worker has more injuries than any other industry worker, and this is directly from the Deskbound book, including heavy lifting, construction, metal industry, transportation industry, etc. So what this is talking about, not so much that, we're necessarily worried about a massively, traumatic injury in the office place, but, kind of those general aches a lot of people have, my knee just kind of hurts, or I got up and took a step up a flight of stairs and heard a crunch and now my knee hurts, or I twisted while I was taking a dish that I was washing and drying to put into into my cupboards, and I twisted, lifted that dish, and I heard my back pop, or whatever type of things. Those types of kind of minor injuries that seem to come out of nowhere tend to happen a lot more to those office workers versus people that have essentially just a way more active occupation. So let's think about a little bit just about a typical day, and we'll brainstorm some places that people do sit throughout the day. So we got eating breakfast, just gonna throw them up here for you: reading, working, sitting in meetings, slouching over your smartphone. That's a very common one. Driving to work, watching hockey or other sports. We're studying, we're eating, we're relaxing with our leisure activities, using the washroom, watching the news, watching our soaps, etc. And the main thing you want to look at is, these are a lot of places that we probably would sit. And, save for a few of them, driving to work or driving home, you probably got to sit when you're driving, using the washroom, arguably, depending what's going on in there, you might have to sit down for that. But pretty much everything else that you see on here is stuff that we typically do sitting down for no other reason than that's just how we're used to doing it. There's nothing stopping you from, standing up and holding your breakfast, and your plate in your hand when you're eating, for a portion of it. Again, you don't have to take all of these to heart. There's nothing stopping you from standing up for a bit during that hockey game, walking around a little bit while you watch the sports, and then sitting back down after, a minute or 30 seconds or something like that. When we're on our smartphones, we typically have it in our hand with our neck, chin tucked to our chest, almost staring at our phone, because we don't want to miss out on, I don't know, everything in the world or whatever. There's nothing stopping you from even doing that exact same activity and just lifting your hands up to eye level in front of you so that you can have your neck in a better position while you play on your phone and do your things. So, a lot of times when we're looking at these things and looking at times that we sit throughout the day, try to think to yourself, do I have to be sitting right now? Is it quite, mandatory for the activity that we're doing, or is it something that we're just doing? Maybe I'm not going to sit down at the coffee shop with my friend next time. We're going to get our coffee to go and we'll just walk around the block that the coffee shop's on, or in the park or something like that, and still have that same conversation with your friend that you were hoping to have. So again, not saying that you should never sit, but let's think a little bit when we are sitting down. If it's something we could do either in its entirety standing, if we have the fitness level for that, or if it's something we can just break up a little bit more so that we're sitting, standing, moving around, not just being in that stuck sitting position, you'd want to think about, how you can implement that into your lifestyle for yourself. Another graphic that we could look at that just kind of hammers this point home, because it's something that I think we can all relate to. So this is a graphic from the Heart and Stroke Foundation, and it's just showing a typical day for a person. And this is a person who's actually exercising. So this person wakes up in the morning, they're going for a brisk walk, which is a great way to start the day. Then they're sitting down to drive to work. They're getting up out of their car to go sit down to work at their computer desk, do that for a few hours. They stand up to go sit down to eat lunch. Do that for a little bit. You stand up to go sit back down to go back to work, stand up to go sit down to drive, and then this person, again, getting some exercise, which is awesome to see. They're going to the gym, or maybe they're strength training at home or wherever, but getting in some strength training for 30 minutes. And then you can see, they're going home to sit down and eat dinner, and then we're usually sitting down or lying in bed for the rest of the evening, reading, watching TV, we're on our phones, whatever it might be, until we eventually just go to sleep. So you can kind of see how, this is a very probably typical day for a lot of people. I would be lying if I said this never happened to me, but, we want to try to keep days like this to a minimum. We want to try to think about, all of those tasks that we're doing throughout the day. Driving, as I said, might be one of the few that we're not able to combat that much. If you're taking the bus, sometimes taking, getting off a stop early if you have the time, getting an extra walk, that way you can add a little bit more activity. When we're at work, if you can find ways to either just make a point of getting up and moving a little bit, or adjusting your workstation to allow for more movement or more standing, more physical activity, that's always going to be a positive thing. But, as we're looking at this graphic, and as I said, this is a person who's making a point of exercising, which is really, really good, still is sitting for most of the day, and they're going to run into possibly a lot of trouble down the road. So next we're going to play another video here for you. What this video is going to outline is a little bit more about what's actually happening internally in our body when we are sitting for those prolonged periods of time. So we'll get that video going.
Right now, you're probably sitting down to watch this video, and staying seated for a few minutes to view it is probably okay. But the longer you stay put, the more agitated your body becomes. It sits there counting down the moments until you stand up again and take it for a walk. That may sound ridiculous. Our bodies love to sit, right? Not really. Sure, sitting for brief periods can help us recover from stress or recuperate from exercise. But nowadays, our lifestyles make us sit much more than we move around, and our bodies simply aren't built for such a sedentary existence. In fact, just the opposite is true. The human body is built to move, and you can see evidence of that in the way it's structured. Inside us are over 360 joints and about 700 skeletal muscles that enable easy, fluid motion. The body's unique physical structure gives us the ability to stand up straight against the pull of gravity. Our blood depends on us moving around to be able to circulate properly. Our nerve cells benefit from movement, and our skin is elastic, meaning it molds to our motions. So if every inch of the body is ready and waiting for you to move, what happens when you just don't? Let's start with the backbone of the problem, literally. Your spine is a long structure made of bones and the cartilage discs that sit between them. Joints, muscles, and ligaments that are attached to the bones hold it all together. A common way of sitting is with a curved back and slumped shoulders, a position that puts uneven pressure on your spine. Over time, this causes wear and tear in your spinal discs, overworks certain ligaments and joints, and puts strain on muscles that stretch to accommodate your back's curved position. This hunched shape also shrinks your chest cavity while you sit, meaning your lungs have less space to expand into when you breathe. That's a problem because it temporarily limits the amount of oxygen that fills your lungs and filters into your blood. Around the skeleton are the muscles, nerves, arteries, and veins that form the body's soft tissue layers. The very act of sitting squashes, pressurizes, and compresses, and these more delicate tissues really feel the brunt. Have you ever experienced numbness and swelling in your limbs when you sit? In areas that are the most compressed, your nerves, arteries, and veins can become blocked, which limits nerve signaling, causing the numbness, and reduces blood flow in your limbs, causing them to swell. Sitting for long periods also temporarily deactivates lipoprotein lipase, a special enzyme in the walls of blood capillaries that breaks down fats in the blood. So when you sit, you're not burning fat nearly as well as when you move around. What effect does all of this stasis have on the brain? Most of the time, you probably sit down to use your brain, but ironically, lengthy periods of sitting actually run counter to this goal. Being stationary reduces blood flow and the amount of oxygen entering your bloodstream through your lungs. Your brain requires both of those things to remain alert, so your concentration levels will most likely dip as your brain activity slows. Unfortunately, the ill effects of being seated don't only exist in the short term. Recent studies have found that sitting for long periods is linked with some types of cancers and heart disease, and can contribute to diabetes, kidney, and liver problems. In fact, researchers have worked out that worldwide, inactivity causes about 9% of premature deaths a year. That's over 5 million people. So what seems like such a harmless habit actually has the power to change our health. But luckily, the solutions to this mounting threat are simple and intuitive. When you have no choice but to sit, try switching the slouch for a straighter spine. And when you don't have to be bound to your seat, aim to move around much more, perhaps by setting a reminder to yourself to get up every half hour. But mostly, just appreciate that bodies are built for motion, not for stillness. In fact, since the video's almost over, why not stand up and stretch right now? Treat your body to a walk. It'll thank you later.
All right, so a little bit of information about what's actually happening internally in the body. We're going to talk a little bit more about a few of those points as we're moving along with the presentation today. So have a brief look at spinal mechanics. So what does sitting do to our bodies? So lower back pain, 8 out of 10 people have it sometime in their lives. I'm pretty sure a good amount of people watching this either have had back pain at some point or know somebody who has had back pain in the past. It's $1 billion every year industry, not including lost work time. So what this is talking about is the amount of money spent on seeing your physician, seeing potentially a physiotherapist or acupuncturist or whatever type of specialist you might be seeing for yourself, any kinds of therapies you have to take for that, medications that you have to buy, things like that. Really do add up over the years. So we'll take a quick peek when we're thinking about the spinal mechanics. So if we're looking at these two trees here, which one would we say is, a sturdier tree, or in this case, emulating a sturdier spine? And I'm fairly certain we could all probably agree this tree right here is going to be the tree that's going to give us the most stability. So our spine is fairly similar in that regard, in the sense that our spine is made up of numerous vertebrae that are stacked up on top of each other with discs in between, to allow for that movement through the spine and to allow for that stability potentially. Another way we can kind of illustrate that point, if you were to kind of take your hands and put them right against each other like so, and we can kind of imagine, this is a vertebrae and this is a vertebrae of our spine, which would be this way generally, but that's a little bit too hard to do for the entire time. So what we're going to do here for a second, you're just going to take your palms, you're just going to push them together with your hands fairly straight, as far as you can for a couple of seconds. should feel pretty secure, should feel like this really isn't going to go anywhere. And, this would be kind of how our spine should feel when it's nice and stable, when our vertebrae are properly stacked on top of each other in our spine. We think about taking our hands and just slanting them slightly. So one hand is a little bit slanted, the other one's not. Now push your hands together as hard as you can. You should feel that your hands are kind of trying to do this over time. So it's not going to do it immediately, even if you're pushing pretty hard, but you should feel that this makes it want to go like this, whereas this, was pretty secure. So when we slant our hands, that's kind of similar to this gentleman right here with his back really, really slanted, and all those vertebrae are kind of pulling apart on one side of the vertebrae while they're pushing a little bit harder on the other side, and creating kind of uneven pressure on those discs. And, in a short amount of time or in the immediate sense, we should be able to move all these different ways to the spine. But if we're thinking about, on our computer at work, if we're constantly like this, as we're working on our computer or whatever it is that we're doing, hunching our shoulders, having our head slant forward, that's our vertebrae being like this at a small scale all day, every day, or, for at least the 8 hours when you're on your computer, 40 hours a week, or whatever it may be if you have a desk job. So, that little bit of tension you feel even right now when we're doing this is a little bit of tension that those muscles are having to deal with the entire time, trying to maintain, support with the spine as you're lifting, like the gentleman here in the picture, or, if we're just thinking about our posture when we're on our phones, watching TV, at work, etc. So again, we want to think to ourselves, this is the spine that we want to try to create as often as possible, as opposed to this type of spine where we're going to lead to those uneven wear and tear on the joints, the discs, the ligaments, and even the muscles around the associated joints. So that's talking about our, majority of our spine, our mid-spine, our lower back. What's happening to our neck when we're sitting in these compromised positions. So here's another illustration that just kind of reviews a bit of how the leverage of the weight of our head works depending on the position of our neck or our spine. So the human head itself, on average weighs 8 to 12 pounds roughly. If your head is stacked up right over top of your shoulders and your hips, and as you can see in the first picture, that little bit of an S shape that we do want throughout the spine essentially, but fairly straight up and down, head is going to be well supported. In this case, the pressure is going straight down through that spine, and it's going to create about 12 pounds of pressure on the spine itself. So it weighs what it weighs in this case. When we start going to having that little bit of a forward lean where we're starting to hunch through the spine, the leverage or the pressure that's created on our neck or some of our more vulnerable tissues, somewhere along this chain, depending on, where the head position is, we start putting up to 32 pounds, 42 pounds. I'm sure, depending on your posture, it could even be more than that. But that amount of force is kind of going through those parts of your neck or your spine all day, every day when you have your head in that type of a posture. So, if you're having quite a bit of wear and tear and strain on a lot of these muscles, just trying to hold on for dear life, so to speak, to keep your head in somewhat of an upright position, it's putting a lot of strain through a lot of different positions in your body or in your spine and your neck. So another way you can illustrate this point, you can take like a water bottle like I have here, or even just a can of soup or something light, or even just the weight of your hand. We take our arm and we have it straight up and down where, my elbow, my shoulder, my wrist are in a relatively straight alignment with the shoulder. I could probably hold this bottle here for quite a while. And if you're practicing this at home, you could probably do that as well. The second I move my arm out like this, I could still hold it here for a little bit since we're choosing something pretty light, but it starts putting a lot more strain in the shoulder, and you can feel these muscles start burning. They have to work a lot harder to maintain this object in space out in front of us versus this object in space directly over top of our joints, working directly against gravity. So if we think about our head, like those pictures are illustrating, the head here is why we don't feel that much strain in this position. When the head is here, if you don't have this type of posture already, you'll probably feel a little strain just poking your head out like this. So again, it's not going to be, in the immediate sense on a one-off, the end of the world where it's going to create so much pressure or pain and tension that, we have to be worried. But that little bit of uneven pressure, that little bit of strain that we put our body through all day, every day, over time does take its toll and can start adding a little bit more ache or pain in certain areas along our spine. Some people might even, get headaches, or they might even find in more extreme cases that they're starting to encroach on nerves and things like that, where they start developing quite a bit of pain. So again, this is something that, we want to just be thinking about what can we be doing for ourselves to reduce our chances of, these types of injuries or these types of aches and pains really holding us back throughout our daily lives. So hopefully that helped illustrate this point a little bit better and gives you a little bit of a better understanding about how your body position all day long can actually have, a pretty big impact on some of those aches and pains that you might be feeling throughout the day. So again, just want to be conscious of trying to engage our muscles. If we refer back to that standing sequence we reviewed at the start, think about those postures, and we just want to do the best we can with all of those. And then over time, as we're working on it more and more, hopefully that becomes the normal way that you position your body instead of the way you have to constantly think about every single day. So another thing we want to talk about is, what is the reason for our pain sometimes, or what was the actual cause? In the book the Deskbound book, they do a pretty good job of putting together or using an analogy called the Beaver versus the breeze analogy. So what they're talking about is, if there was a tree by a river or in the forest, wherever it may be, and a beaver was kind of working away at that tree for a little while, and something scared that beaver off, or it didn't quite take the tree down, and then a little bit later, it was a really windy day and that tree fell over, what would we say is the main reason that that tree fell over? Would we say that, basically it was the wind? If we put a big fence around that tree would have been fine. That's the big problem there. We didn't have enough fences around trees. Or would we say that, that beaver working away at that tree made it so weak that all it took was a breeze to knock it over? And without being too leading, hopefully you can come to the same conclusion that, yeah, the reason that tree fell down is most likely the beaver was the main problem, and then the breeze just kind of, came along and finished the tree off. So when we're thinking about our joints, when we're sitting in these little compromised positions that don't immediately seem to cause any pain or discomfort, or we're not thinking about how we're lifting things if we have a job where we're lifting stuff throughout the day, or what our body position is essentially, that's kind of like us being our own little beaver working away, at the ligaments around our spine, or the discs between our vertebrae, or the meniscus in our knee, or whatever it may be. We're that little beaver that's kind of working away on that, where a lot of times it doesn't take anything fantastic for you to kind of notice the pain. A very common way for people to throw out their back is honestly tying their shoes or putting on socks. So it's not that, you should have never worn socks. It's that you probably, up to that point, were doing things that made your spine become less flexible or less strong, or whatever the root cause is that led to an injury while you put on your socks, so to speak. So want to be thinking about this. We don't want to be a little beaver working away at our joints and making them worse. We want to be, a little bit more productive. Maybe we want to be like that robot and Wall-E, cleaning up our joints instead and trying to make little changes that can help improve that for ourselves. Another thing we want to think about is the chronic pain cycle, because pain can be a really confusing thing sometimes. And it's very intuitive. If something hurts, that you wouldn't want to do that thing that hurts specifically. So when we do have a chronic pain condition, we do need to think about our chronic pain a little bit, the type of pain that we're in. And then we do want to listen to certain types of pain, and other types of pain, we just want to be aware of, but be aware we can continue. So the chronic pain cycle itself generally, starts with that pain that we have. The next 4 steps kind of all happen potentially at the same time, but we get that muscle tension, leads to that reduced circulation. Our muscles can become inflamed. All of these things are often going to cause us to reduce our movement or try to move less, which leads us to ultimately just still being in pain or in more pain. And what we're finding out, when we're thinking about pain, especially chronic pain, is that, we do need to be aware of it. You don't want to ignore it 100%, but you don't want to let it rule your lives as well. A good rule that you could follow, so try to think about, let's say for instance, I have arthritis in my knee, and let's say on average it's always a 3 out of 10, whether I'm sitting, I'm standing, I'm walking, it's a 3 out of 10. That's just my constant pain level due to my arthritis in this case. So understanding that arthritis itself isn't going to go away, it is a progressive disease, we can understand that, yeah, there's going to be a degree of pain in that knee. So let's say that I have that 3 out of 10 pain in my knee. I stand up to go for a walk because I've heard walking might be good for my knee, and it's still that same kind of pain, still a 3 out of 10. I've been walking for 5 minutes, it still hurts, basically the same as when I was sitting down. This can often be an indication that that type of exercise was actually okay for you to do. Your knee was already at a level of pain. The pain did not increase in any capacity with the exercise. This can be an okay exercise to do. Let's say that the pain got a little bit worse. Let's say it's a 3 out of 10. After 10 minutes, it became a 5 out of 10. Another 10 minutes later, it became a 9 out of 10. So again, yeah, we have the pain there. The first 5 minutes was totally fine. That's where there was no pain. Went to 10 minutes, had a little bit extra pain. Went to 20 minutes, it was extreme pain. So this could be a situation where, if you're very concerned, definitely go see a physiotherapist, go see a doctor, someone more specialized. But if it's, a type of pain you are comfortable with or aware of, you've had it for a while, you can kind of think to yourself, you know what? It was okay to go 10 minutes. I might need to just stick with 10 minutes at a time for a little while. Maybe I can do multiple 10-minute walks throughout the day instead of one long 20-minute walk. And then I can start building up the conditioning and the fitness in my knee and hopefully, help manage that pain a little bit better as the tissues around the knee become stronger, especially our muscles. So that can be an indication of, a situation where you're doing an exercise, you're doing the walking, it felt okay for a little while and then it didn't. So you want to monitor how long you're able to go. And over time, you might find that as you're working on strengthening everything around that joint and improving that joint health of the knee, you can start going for those longer walks as your conditioning improves. The other type of pain we'd want to think about. So now let's imagine you stand up to start going for your walk and 3 steps in, it jumps to 20 out of 10. You can barely move, it hurts so bad. That would definitely be the type of pain we would want to avoid in this case. You might want to think to yourself, maybe this wasn't the right activity at this moment. It might be something you can do later on in life, but right now we need to find something a little bit easier on the knee. And we'll work on those types of things until you're able to get into whatever activities you're wanting to. But if it drastically increases and changes, from that dull ache to a sharp stabbing pain, that would be an indication you don't necessarily need to stop all exercise, but you might stop that specific exercise if it's causing that amount of pain. But it's important to keep this stuff in mind because when we're talking about chronic pain, we're understanding that, you are having some pain, obviously due to the condition that you might have. But a lot of times when we stop our activity because of the pain from our chronic pain condition, we start deconditioning. And then when we start trying to get going again, it's hard to differentiate, how much of the pain is due to my condition, arthritis, fibromyalgia, whatever it may be, and how much of the pain is actually due to the fact that I just have deconditioned so much that none of the muscles around that joint are strong enough to handle the load anymore. So when it's a weakness thing, and often it's a bit of both, I have chronic pain because I have a chronic pain condition, but I also have some pain because I've deconditioned. The pain that's coming from deconditioning, we can often improve that pain or reduce that pain quite a bit as the muscles become stronger. A lot of times when we're thinking about what type of outcome am I looking for when I'm exercising and I have chronic pain, obviously it'd be nice if we could magic away all the pain in the world, but understanding that you might still have some pain forever in that joint, but you may be able to improve how much stuff you can do with that same amount of pain, which ultimately is going to help you do a lot more within your own life and maintain your personal quality of life because you're just able to be more independent and do a lot of these things. Versus if we kind of avoid the pain altogether, wait till our joint is at a point that it is so weak, the muscles around it to support us that, on top of having our condition, we now have, just general weaknesses that's compounding our pain. So it's important to think about the types of pain that you might be having when you're doing an activity, if you do have chronic pain, but don't let it tell you not to exercise 100%. Pay attention to how the pain feels, pay attention to how it's changing while you do the activity. If you find that it's a little bit too much pain, try not to think that you should stop activity. You might need to stop that activity, but you can probably find another activity that's going to help you improve your personal situation in some way, shape, or form. So next we'll talk a little bit about how we got to where we are today, ultimately. So exercise from an evolutionary standpoint, a day in the life of someone, we could even say probably just 100 years ago, a lot of this might have rang true. So people are digging, climbing, crawling, running, squatting, pushing, pulling, lifting things as part of their day. And Before we had a lot of technology to do a lot of things for us. So let's say 200 years ago, if you can't just go to a grocery store and buy every single thing that you want, you probably have to grow a few things for yourself. Or, let's go back to a time before there was running water in a lot of people's houses. You can't go very long without water. So if water is not coming from the tap in your house, you obviously have to make a point of walking to where the water is, loading the water up into some kind of vessel, bringing it back so that you can consume the water. So you can see something as simple as drinking water created quite a bit of activity for some people a long time ago, whereas now it's not an activity at all. It's 2 feet away, almost anywhere you are, since we're fortunate enough to have running water where we are right now. So again, you want to think about, all of the exercise that we used to get just from our general activity to get through the day, to live our lives, keep ourselves healthy and fed and safe. And, the exercise kind of happened on its own just because it was necessary to get through everything. When we fast forward to today, there's a lot of activities that have become non-activities just because it's become too readily available or easy for us to access, which is great. It's great not to have to worry about a lot of these basic needs. But we have to start thinking, if all that activity we used to get from our general day-to-day stuff is now gone, we need to replace that activity with different activity, because at the end of the day, our body needs to move, our muscles need to strengthen, our bones need to remain strong, and our heart and lungs need to remain healthy if we want to, continue feeling good as we're all going to hopefully get older. So we can think a little bit about, even not so much what I was talking about before, where we're thinking, a few hundred years ago, but even just one generation ago, if you could think about for a second, what are some of the normal things that your parents had to do versus, normal things for yourself or your kids, depending on your age, or if you have kids that, might be affecting their day right now. I'll give you a couple seconds to think about that. And then when you're thinking about that, I can reflect a little bit even on, my own personal life. My father grew up in rural Saskatchewan on a farm, and, the days, involved a lot of chores, number one. And then number two, this was about, I think, the 60s-ish at this point. That sounds bad if I don't know my dad's birthday, but no, it is around the 60s. And there's not a lot of technology. I think my dad said Pong was a thing, which was a video game that had, paddles and a ball or whatever. But, that was the only game. Not really anyone had it where he lived. And basically, if you didn't want to be bored out of your skull just staring at the wall inside your home after the chores are done, you kind of had to go out and do something to, maintain your sanity potentially, or maintain your entertainment. If we fast forward to today, we have tons of activities, tons of hobbies, tons of things available to help us pass the time and help us enjoy, the downtime that we have. But a lot of it is not very active. You could almost do no activity and survive these days if you really wanted to. We got Netflix and all these other streaming companies that offer you all kinds of shows, hours and hours and hours and hours and hours of video entertainment that you never have to leave your house to go to the movie theater or even talk to another person if you don't want to. If you want a restaurant quality meal, you can order through apps online restaurant meals to be delivered to your house now. So you don't even get that little bit of activity of walking to your car and then walking to the restaurant and then having to do the reverse on the way home. Groceries are something that, you also don't have to do for yourself anymore. You can get groceries delivered now, or a lot of grocery stores will do all the grocery shopping for you and you can just come pick it up. So again, we're finding all these little things that, maybe we're just a little bit of activity in their own right, but we're actually removing even those little bits of activity due to the technology that's available to us. So again, it's not the end of the world. You should enjoy your downtime and enjoy, whatever shows and things that you like, but you don't necessarily have to be sitting on the couch the whole time. It's again, just thinking about how can I do what I want to do, watch my shows, while also making sure that I'm not making my health take a major hit. So, instead of sitting and watching the shows for 10 hours straight with barely any movement, you could make a point, every half hour, you're going to pause it and get up and go do something, or you can leave it running and just do something, in the room that you're watching your shows in. Maybe make a point that you're going to go to the grocery store and actually do your grocery shopping. Don't let the apps entice you too much, because again, if you're not replacing the activity with something else, your heart, your lungs, your bones, your muscles, they don't really care what excuse you had for being less active. They're just going to respond to the activity that you're giving to them, and you're going to be at the fitness level you're at or medical condition that you're at, sometimes based on a lot of these choices that we're making to be less active. So it's okay to enjoy the technology, but just be mindful of how sedentary you're being or how much you're sitting, and that you need to find ways to get that activity in if you do want to have those types of hobbies more often than not. So inactivity and diabetes, these are some stats from the USA, but we're very similar here in Canada. So in the 1960s, about 50% of jobs were considered desk-bound jobs. So essentially a desk-bound job would be a job where the majority of your activities or job requirements or things that you're doing throughout the day would require you to be at your desk. About 1.6 million people had what's called type 2 diabetes. Pre-diabetes wasn't even a term. Essentially, most people didn't have diabetes. Some people did, so we'll just address the people that have it. The population of the USA at that time was around 181 million people. So we fast forward to just 5 years ago, 2015, the amount of desk-bound jobs are roughly 80%. So more jobs now require you to be at your desk for the majority of your day. Type 2 diabetes, we have 30.3 million people that in the USA have what is diagnosed as type 2 diabetes. And we're realizing it's such a big problem in terms of the amount of people that are starting to have diabetes that we need to start thinking about the warning signs for diabetes. So we've created a whole new term called prediabetes. 84.1 million people have what's called prediabetes in the USA at that time. And essentially what prediabetes means is if you have prediabetes and the lifestyle that you're leading is quite inactive and the food choices that you're making maybe aren't conducive to reducing your chance of contracting diabetes, essentially if you stay the course as is, you're probably going to get diabetes one day, and that's going to be a major concern for you. So many people have diabetes, we had to start terming the warning signs for diabetes so we can hopefully start combating the disease before you actually get full-blown diabetes. And to put things in perspective, the population of the United States, about 325 million people at that time. So you can see that, yeah, there's definitely more people in 2015 than there were in the 1960s. But when we think overall about the amount of total people that are afflicted with this condition, it's affecting quite a few people. And these stats are pulled from the Center of Disease Control from the USA. So another thing I should touch on, I'm not saying that the inactivity is the only reason. Obviously how we're eating, the access to a lot of these high carbohydrate, highly processed foods that a lot of us are consuming, that's definitely going to be one of the major contributing factors. But we are finding out, that activity that we have or the inactivity that we're having throughout the day is also a major contributing factor when we think about the fact that a lot of times if a person has diabetes, they're both not being that active and they're often not eating that well. And when you put those two together, that's where we really run into a lot of trouble. So your body does adapt. Our body, as we touched on at the start, will adapt to basically anything that you're doing to it. The body just kind of wants to go along with whatever your brain decides you want to do throughout the day. So if your muscles are too weak for the demands they face, the load then has to be taken onto other more vulnerable tissues such as bone, cartilage, tendons, ligaments. So, for instance, if we think about, the example of right knee pain or something like that, or developing arthritis potentially. If you have an office job, we're not using our butt muscles very much other than sitting on them. We're not using our quads, the muscles in the front of our thigh very much since we're sitting so much. So these muscles are going to get a little bit weaker throughout the day on a daily basis just due to what we're doing to them, which is just not a lot of activity in the example that I'm explaining. So when that person stands up, they're probably not going to notice initially, but maybe they start locking their knees out a little harder when they're taking steps. Maybe they start locking their hips out a little bit harder. Sometimes positionally, we start arching our back more to get upright if we don't have the flexibility through the hips anymore from all that sitting. And yeah, we run into some problems down the road where maybe now you start wearing away at the cartilage in your knees, or you start, taking some stabs at your meniscus by accident because of all the pressure we're putting on it. And over time, those vulnerable tissues start wearing down, and that's where we start having a lot of that pain, that discomfort, and damage in those joints. So something that can feel so nice and natural, just like an extra serving of dessert, can make things happen that you wouldn't expect. Dessert, you on a one-off, it's just a piece of cake. If you eat it every day, that's a heck of a lot of cake, and that's where you start running into a lot of problems. We think about, what's happening when we're sitting at work. It doesn't feel like sitting is something that should be hard on our bodies. It's often what we do to relax when we do feel that our body is strained. But we are finding out, more and more that this kind of minor pressure, these minor imbalances throughout the body that we're having get exacerbated day in and day out are leading to a lot of longer term problems than we would have thought about previously. So as I talked about, the exercise is not enough necessarily. So again, exercise is great, but we are finding out more and more you really can't exercise away 15 hours of sitting if that's the overall goal. He refers to the load on our body throughout the day when we're sitting and not really exercising or moving as an innocuous environmental load. So again, it's just a load that's there on our spine, on our muscles between our vertebrae, in our hips, our knees, our shoulders, potentially, depending on how we're positioning ourselves. But it's a load that we don't really notice, but it is there and it is causing some wear and tear. You may have also heard a slogan, inactivity or sitting is the new smoking, or inactivity is the new smoking. And, we're finding out more and more that just like how smoking is causing a lot of health problems for people that do smoke, it's actually a lot of health problems that are fairly preventable by either if that person had never smoked or just making a point of quitting smoking as soon as possible so their lungs can start healing. So they run into a lot of health problems that are in large part just inflicted due to the choice to smoke. So we're finding out inactivity is another thing that a lot of people choose to do, choose not to do activity, that is. And that's leading to a lot of health problems that, are potentially preventable 100% in some people if they were more active, or if it's something that you did have a predisposition to, that you'd be able to manage that condition a lot better if you added some activity into your lifestyle. So inactivity, just like smoking, is a choice, and if you were to do the opposite of both of those, you would probably have a lot better of better health for yourself overall. So exercising typically works best when supplemented with increased overall daily activity. So again, it's great to get that exercise. I highly encourage you to keep exercising if you are currently, or to start exercising if you aren't currently, but understand that you can't use that exercise as an excuse to just do absolutely nothing else for the rest of the day. We do got to be a little bit mindful of what's happening throughout the day and maintaining our activity levels as best we can throughout the day to combat if we have a job or something that makes us a little less active. So another concept we want to talk about is just the amount of calories that we burn throughout the day. So yeah, when you're exercising, you're going to burn a fair amount of calories during that time, but we also burn a heck of a lot of calories when we're not exercising. And our general movement or activities that we do throughout the day are what are going to denote, how much of that calories we're going to burn just from our day-to-day stuff. So they call it NEAT calories, which stands for non-exercise activity thermogenesis. Calories are a measurement of heat. So essentially we're just measuring how much energy we're burning through movement that is not necessarily exercise. Work is one of the biggest indicators. So these values are a bit of an estimation. There are a lot of factors, but just to give you a general idea of the difference in calories burned, depending on the type of activity the person's participating in. A sedentary job, so this would just be a job where you're kind of sitting at your desk predominantly, not doing a heck of a lot else, you might burn an additional 300 calories that day compared to if you'd been lying down that entire time instead of sitting up. Once you add an active job, so a job where maybe you're moving, you're standing, you're walking, you're going to burn maybe an additional 1,300 calories on that day during your work time. Again, this would be compared to if you had just been lying down and doing nothing. So burn 1,300 more calories just by having a more active job. If you had a strenuous job, so this would be a job where you're not necessarily just moving, but you're actually doing tasks that are challenging, maybe to the point that it's so hard you have to take breaks. So, this could be like a heavy construction job where maybe you're a laborer doing a lot of the lifting and the grunt work. That would be a very strenuous job, or, a landscaping job where you're digging holes and raking gravel or whatever it may be that you're doing. But again, just stuff that you're having to exert yourself quite a bit. So again, you're going to burn maybe an additional 2,300 calories potentially on that day compared to if you were lying down and doing absolutely nothing. And to make these numbers make more sense, we'll talk a little bit more about it on the next slide. So couple concepts that we want to have in mind, or one concept specifically, is our basal metabolic rate, or sometimes it's called our resting metabolic rate. And essentially what this is the amount of calories that your body needs to consume, or the amount of calories your body would burn rather, just to keep your organs alive and keep your body functioning if you were to basically do nothing else. So basically, if you were able to wake up, open your eyes, not move for 24 hours, and then close your eyes and go to bed, that would be your basal metabolic rate. To put that number in perspective, if we're going to take a ballpark number, if you're about 180-pound male, you would probably have a BMR, or a basal metabolic rate, of roughly 2,000 calories, you would say. Again, there are a lot of factors that could contribute to more or less, but weigh roughly 2,000 calories. So if we're going back to this slide here, we're thinking about work being one of the biggest indicators. That same person, if he had a very strenuous job where he had to exert himself quite forcefully for the majority of his workday, he might burn over double the amount of calories than if he had a more sedentary job where he was sitting at a desk all day. So when we think about the food choices that we're making throughout the day, or the amount of calories that we're eating, how much we're burning is going to play a major role in if we're going to be gaining weight or losing weight or maintaining the same weight that we have. So when we're thinking about that conceptually, whether it's work related or just general activity related, we want to think about ways we can add more calorie burn to the day, especially if you are in a scenario where weight management is an issue, especially having trouble losing weight. If we're burning more calories and we're eating adequately for the amount of calories we're burning, you should be a lot more successful over time. So again, the sitting, no real significant extra metabolism. Again, all of these are going to be compared to lying down. They're not compared to each other, but sitting upright versus lying down for an activity, probably not a lot of significant extra metabolism or extra calories expended. If we start fidgeting while we're sitting, so this could be, if you're twiddling your thumbs, moving your legs around, whatever it may be, a small increase, about a 5% increase, as we showed on the previous slide. A job where you're sitting, we could probably consider, typing and mouse work and stuff like that, sort of similar to fidgeting. So you burn a little extra calories, but really nothing substantial. A standing still task, so again, where we're now standing, supporting our body weight, 10% increase. So that's, it's a bit more. It's a noticeable amount more calories you would expend that day. But again, we're not really burning a ton of calories just by standing still on the spot. Once you start adding in going for a stroll or adding movement to it, or exercise, and that's where we start noticing a big jump. We burn basically twice as many calories potentially than we would have if we were lying down at that time instead, or not moving. So when we say going for a stroll, 2.2 miles per hour, to put that speed in perspective, about 4 miles per hour is the fastest on a treadmill most people can walk before they have to start thinking about, do I need to start jogging to go faster? So if 4 is a fairly brisk walk, a little bit faster than a super brisk walk is what we're talking about. So, not super slow, not super fast, probably a speed most of us can comfortably walk would be 2.2 miles per hour. So again, you're going to burn a heck of a lot more calories. Active job, strenuous job. So these would be jobs, the active job where you're actively walking, moving, strenuous job where you're actively exerting yourself through other means, burn a lot more calories compared to any job where you're just kind of standing still or sitting or anything like that. So if we're thinking about these concepts, and I know I've talked a lot about it from a work perspective, but even just thinking about, our daily lives or things we're doing throughout the days, can you think of some different ways that you could apply these principles, adding in that extra movement or extra load on our body to help us burn a little bit more neat calories? And to give you a few examples that come up fairly often when we're teaching these classes in person, I think we've all heard the one when you're going grocery shopping, parking farther away from the store versus close to the store. If you're doing that every single time, it's going to be a fair amount of extra calories burned throughout the year just from that alone. If you are someone that takes public transportation, you could make a point, if you have the time, or you could plan to have the time, to get off, a bus stop or 2 or 3 early and, add in, 10, 15, 20 minutes of walking to your day from the bus stop to your work or your home, or wherever you're busing to. When we're thinking about going for, coffee with your friends, I touched on this earlier, there's nothing really stopping you from taking that coffee to go and going for a stroll with your friend instead of sitting down and talking to your friend. Ultimately, you'll get to talk about each other's lives together, have a good time, get your exercise at the same time, ultimately accomplishing more than you had planned to in that case, versus sitting at the shop just to chat. So yeah, you want to think a lot about, what you have planned for the day or what you have planned for the week. And think about, if your week or day is already pretty sedentary, what activities do you have planned that require you to sit? And what activities do you have planned where you just kind of choose to sit? And for the ones where you're just kind of choosing to sit, make a point of getting up and being a little more active. For the ones that require you to sit, then obviously, you're going to have to sit for that duration of time. So if you are desk bound, we do want to think about a few things. So, throughout the day, there can be a lot of different ways a person could be working. And if we're not thinking too much about it, it might mostly just be sitting at your desk. So here's just a few different examples of different workstations a person can have, as well as a few examples of maybe poor posture or good posture in a certain position. So, when we're looking at these things, I get a lot of questions from people about exercise balls and things like that. So at a level, they can help you engage muscles around your trunk a little bit better if you're thinking about it. If you're like this individual here who's basically sitting with the same curved spine that he would have been sitting at in a desk, he's probably not really doing himself much of a favor using the ball over a chair in this case. We would want to consider whenever we're using a ball, especially for office work, we don't have armrests, so there might be a little more tension in the shoulders just from an elevated arm position. So, you might have a ball that you could bounce back and forth from, sit in the chair for a little bit, sit in the ball for a little bit, and make sure in both cases you're being mindful of your spinal position. If you have a chair with support for your neck, only works if you let it support your neck. One step better would just be, as we talked about at the start, to try to maintain your posture without the supports if you can, and then building up the fitness and the musculature to stabilize the spine better in that case. Walking treadmill desks are kind of interesting in the sense that they're going to help you get some activity. The downside is, depending on the type of job that you have and how much it requires a ton of your thinking power, there would be a point if you're on the treadmill desk all day that you're going to start fatiguing at a level that's going to affect your work. So, a treadmill desk might be a great option if you're very fit and it doesn't affect your mind at all, or something that have available that you could pop on for a little while here and there throughout the day, and then returning to your stationary station afterwards to continue with your work. So yeah, just some different examples. On the right-hand side here is an individual that's actually sitting in one of the best positions when we're thinking about our hips and our spine. We're going to talk about this specifically a little bit more on one of the slides coming up, but essentially when we're sitting in a chair like this person here or here, even on the ball, you'll notice that we're fairly folded at the hips and there's not a lot of motion here. So, when we're sitting, sometimes that's really not avoidable, but if we cross our legs, it'll get you to rotate your hips out a little bit more. So it just creates a little bit of a bigger range of motion for your hips. Also, as a side note, I do encourage people, if you're currently able to get up and down from the ground pretty safely, even if it's not necessarily graceful, but you're not really worried about hurting yourself, I encourage you to get on the ground for a part of every single day. As we talked about with, our body adapting to what we do to it, if the only times you get on the ground are, 6 times a year because you're babysitting or you have grandkids over, your friends' kids are over, whatever it may be, that's 359 days of not being on the floor and 6 days of being on the floor. So if we think long term, are we going to maintain that ability to get up and down from the ground? If you're not really doing anything to maintain your muscular strength and flexibility to do that, it's going to become a problem one day. So if you are able to do it, I definitely recommend, if you're watching TV, sit on the floor for a little while you watch your shows and then get back on the comfy couch afterwards. But do make a point of doing it, because it is something that once you lose the ability, it's a lot harder to get it back than it is to just maintain the ability to do it lifelong. So when we're thinking about optimizing our sitting mechanics, so standing is going to be your best option, or movement is going to be your best option. Trying to switch our mindset to sitting for breaks versus standing for breaks, if that makes sense. But it'll always be better to stand. When you are when standing is not an option, try sitting cross-legged on the ground is a little bit better, or on a chair that allows you to sit with your legs crossed, compared to sitting upright in a chair. If you're able to go one step further, the lotus pose is a posture in yoga. So basically cross-legged, but rotating your hips even more. Instead of having your feet under your knees when you're sitting cross-legged, getting your feet on top of your knees. So again, just a bigger range of motion for the hips again. When you do have to sit upright, prioritize a stiff trunk and a neutral spine. So if you're thinking about the third point from the standing sequence, especially the third, fourth, and fifth points, these are going to be the points that help you maintain a neutral spine when you're sitting. And you could add a second pillar of support. He refers to it as man spreading in the book, or cross-legged would be another one. So I know I've heard this is not the way to sit on the bus necessarily, but when you're somewhere more casual or somewhere where it makes sense to sit like this, again, just like crossing the legs, this creates just a little bit of a bigger motion for the hips, and can even get us engaging our butt muscles a little bit compared to the other positions. So can be a little bit better if you do have to sit upright on a chair and cross-legged is not an option. So 4 tips just to optimize your sitting mechanics. The first one, and we'll run through all of these again a little more in depth, but the first one would just be to review that Get Organized While Standing handout. So just standing up, organizing the muscles around your spine again properly to support it. Second point would just be to sit on the edge of your seat. We'll talk about that a little bit more in a second. Third point, shifting as often as possible. So if you're not able to get up and stand, just trying to shift, move your legs around, move your arms around, get as much activity as you can in the seat. And number 4, and this is the best option no matter what, would be to stand up and move every 20 to 30 minutes in some capacity. Again, this wouldn't be me saying you need to work out every half hour, but it's more every 20 to 30 minutes. If you could stand up, stretch, maybe go for a short walk, for 30 seconds, a minute, 2 minutes type of thing, it's going to go a long way when we're thinking about our joint health and reducing some of that stiffness and that ache that we get. So I'll get you to review these points again. So getting organized while standing. So you would just stand on up. I'll let you try this out at home. And we'll go through all these points again. So we'll stand up. You're going to point your feet forward, screw them into the ground outwardly. Remember, your heels are the screw in this case. You can squeeze our butt muscles. So just engaging or clenching our butt muscles for a second, feeling what it feels like to have those supporting the base of our spine or our pelvis. Take that big breath in and breathe out. Squeeze your abs gently on the exhale. Again, you can clench those abs for a second if you really just want to feel that engagement, and then realize we just want a light engagement of both the butt muscles and the abdominal muscles to maintain our posture. You're going to face your palms forward, so that's going to help get those muscles in the back of your shoulder, your mid-spine engaging a little bit more again. And then we're going to try to do our best to make sure our neck is directly over our shoulders and our hips. So we'd go through all of these points, and then just try sitting back down in the chair behind you, and you'll probably find that you most likely can do points 3, 4, and 5 fairly well when you're sitting on the chair. Number 2 is a little bit harder when you add in, especially the man spreading. So on the previous slide where he's opening the legs as wide as he can, I'll get a little bit of a squeeze in the butt, but we'll kind of lose points 1 and 2 a little bit. But points 3, 4, and 5 we can be really, really aware of to maintain that spinal stability when we're sitting. The next point is sitting on the edge of your seat. So there are 2 bones in your butt, or 2 bony prominences called our ischial tuberosities. If you don't want to call them your ischial tuberosities, if you've ever been to a Zumba class or a yoga class, sorry, I'm losing my mind there for a second. But if you've ever been to a yoga class or a Pilates class or something like that, and they'll talk about your sit bones, they're generally talking about these bony prominences. So when we are sitting, we do want to try to sit on those, not on your hamstrings or your femurs. Part of why that cross-legged position is good is it actually allows you, when you cross your legs, or the lotus pose one step further, the feet on top of the knees when they're crossed, it can actually help put your pelvis in a position where it's a lot easier to sit on these bony prominences. Why it's important to sit on these. In the seated position, they're in a better position underneath your spine to support the spine and allow the spine to stay straighter. If we're sitting on our hamstrings, so the muscles in the back of our thighs or our femurs, our leg bone, our thigh bone rather, if you tend to sit more on those, you're usually going to have a curved spine, number one. If you remember from the video we were showing you earlier, you're actually going to put a lot more pressure on the arteries and nerves and muscles and things on the bottom of your legs, which is going to reduce that circulation a little bit more too. So 2 reasons why you want to sit on those ischial tuberosities. When you are sitting on the chair, as the point says, you want to sit on the edge of a hard, flat chair, ideally not leaning up against the backrest. When your posture does fail, try to stand up, reset that posture, and then sit back down. So part of why we encourage people to use a harder, flatter chair. When you're sitting on the hard, flat chair, you'll eventually notice your butt kind of gets sore, and that will be an indication to get up and move for most of us. When you're sitting on a really cushy chair that's built for comfort, not necessarily for maximizing your own personal health, they want to make that chair as comfy as possible so you can sit on it basically forever without noticing. And as we touched on, that's where we start noticing that we start getting a lot of those longer term chronic pains that we start developing through the hips, the knees, and the spine that might be related to our postural position. So if we go up onto the hard chair, it's going to help reduce our chance of sitting for a super long time. If we're on the edge of the chair, it's going to reduce the chance of the chair putting all that pressure on our hamstrings and under our legs and reducing that circulation. I've had a few patients let me know that even just by making the small change of sitting more forward in their chair instead of further back has, improved some leg swelling issues that they've had. So not saying it's going to 100% get it away, but it made it a little bit better for those people, for a few people, I should say, that basically only change this one thing. So can go a long way. When we say not to use the backrest, so take this point with a grain of salt. If you know you have the physical fitness and the back health to not use a backrest at all, that's where 100%, try to use it as little as possible in that case and really focus on tightening up the abdominal muscles to support the back and that type of thing. If you have a condition or a back injury or something where you actually really do need that backrest. One, if you are injured, talk to your physician, talk to your physiotherapist or whoever you're seeing for therapy about their recommendations. Take their recommendations based on your injury in this case. If it's a situation where you don't necessarily have an injury or anything specifically that's bothering you, but you do get a lot of back fatigue when you don't, try to just wean yourself off of the backrest. And this is something you'll kind of have to figure out for yourself, but you could try sitting up against the backrest for a second or for as long as you need to throughout the day, and then try to pull away from it and sit more forward and use your muscles to support your spine for a duration of time. And what you're looking for is you don't want to pull away from the backrest for the amount of time it would take for your back to become actively sore, because that would make your workday kind of miserable for you. But try to think to yourself. So as an example, I'll just say, let's say that you pull away from the backrest, and if you do it for 15 minutes, your back gets really, really sore. But if you do it for 10, your back is okay. And I'd encourage you to go for 10 minutes at a time. Try to pull away from the backrest, and after 10 minutes, use the backrest for a little bit to support the back and let it recover. And this can be a way you can go about your work day to kind of work on improving that back fitness and that health, if you're not having a specific injury or anything like that. As I said, if there is a specific injury, go see someone more specialized than me and get that assessed and taken care of, and listen to their advice in that case. But for just our general aches and pains that aren't associated with an injury, that can be a great way to work on improving your ability to maintain spinal stability without the backrest in that case. The third point, so shifting as often as possible. So this is definitely not an exhaustive list. This is just directly from the book. Some different positions a person could try to sit in throughout the day. I'm not saying you need to do all of these. I'm not saying that you shouldn't sit in any other way than these. But when you are thinking about shifting your position, what we kind of want to look at, if you look at this gentleman here, so this is Dr. Kelly Starr, he's the one that wrote the Deskbound book. When we look at him, his spine is relatively straight. For his posture, his spine is in a straight position for himself. And you'll notice that when he moves his limbs around his body, he maintains that same position with the spine where he's trying to keep it reasonably straight. So Again, I'm not saying obviously our spine should be able to move in every which way, but when you're thinking about the longer periods of time that you spend in positions while working, that's where you really want to make sure that you're being mindful of that spinal position. So if you want just a couple examples, the three on the left, so this is the one on the top left is just him doing the man spreading, as he called it. So on the edge of the seat, legs are fairly wide open to get a little more engagement here, help him sit a little bit better on those sit bones. This one here below him, the middle left one, is also a really good position to sit in. It's actually a stretch I'll give a lot of times for people's hips for a muscle called our piriformis, just a muscle deeper into our hip, into our pelvis. That can get tight sometimes. So this can be an exercise that can help stretch that out a little bit. And again, if you remember me talking about the cross leg position, this can be a good way to be half cross-legged, so to speak, to get that little extra rotation in the hip that's crossed. You would just want to be mindful to go back and forth. Don't always sit with your left leg up, right leg down. You want to have your right leg up sometimes too, so be mindful of that. The bottom left one is actually maybe not a very functional position to work in, but it can be a great position to pop a stretch in for a little while. As we touched on, when you're in, if you look at the top left one again, just that upright position with your legs in front of you, your hips are kind of folded where we can get a little bit tighter there. So this can actually be on the bottom left where you see that his left leg is kind of straight down, knee towards the ground. A bit of a stretch through the hip joint here in the front and our hip flexors, which can be nice since those tend to tighten up when we're sitting on a chair. Might not be a functional way to work for a long period of time, but you could, go to one side of your chair for 30 seconds, go to the other side for 30 seconds, and pop back to your work, whatever it may be. Also note, so in this picture, just due to the chair and his height, looks like his knee is on the ground. You could also do this without your knee being on the ground at all. And if you have any knee issues, or if you have a knee replacement or anything like that, you wouldn't want to kneel on it anyways necessarily. So it could be elevated off the ground with a higher chair, and you could still get a similar stretch in the hip there. And as I touched on, the best thing you could do for yourself, if it is an option, is just to stand up and move every 20 to 30 minutes. It helps get the blood flowing to stagnant areas, helps with that circulation, can help reduce our muscle tension and improve our overall mobility. As intuitive as it sounds, if we want to be more mobile, move. It can increase the energy and blood flow to the brain. So again, at work especially, sometimes we feel like being shackled to our desk is going to help us stay on task and be better at our job. But if you get up and move around a little bit, get that oxygen circulating a bit better, come back to do your work again after that, you might find you have a little more energy and you actually have a little bit more ability to focus on your task because you're kind of refreshed for it. It can help reduce our chronic pain. So especially, as I mentioned, if a lot of our pain is due to deconditioning, that's where we often can have quite a bit of improvement in our pain levels when we're doing our different activities. So it can help with that potentially. And it can lessen your chance of heart disease, lower our blood triglyceride levels, our blood sugar levels, can have a positive effect on our blood pressure and all those good things as well. So as I said, getting up and moving is going to always be your best option. If it's not an option, thinking about some of the other things, whether it's just standing up out of your chair and then sitting back down without too much movement, fidgeting in your chair, doing chair stretches if you're not allowed to stand up for whatever reason, or just doesn't make sense to be standing at this point. But yeah, just want to be thinking about those things, adding an extra pillar of support, as we touched on, if you are having to sit down, or just getting organized while standing and sitting back down. So, but if you can, this would be the best thing that you could do. Stand up, get moving for a little bit every 20 to 30 minutes, and then get back to work. All right, so thank you for staying with me for this entire time. We'll kind of summarize what we've talked about today, just to remind you. So again, we talked about that inactivity is the new smoking, not just sitting. So again, you're not going to run into the exact same problems from inactivity as you would from smoking, but in both cases, a lot of the issues or how severely our medical issues might affect us can often be made worse if we're inactive or if we smoke. So we have the shear forces in the spinal mechanics. So the Beaver, we use that Beaver or breeze analogy for what is actually causing your back pain. I forgot to mention, so when I was talking about those forces that go through the spine when our spine is in those compromised positions, can be called shear forces. Your body adapts to the stresses that you place on it, the good and the bad. So that's the nice news. If you're not too happy with where you are today, the great news is you can start making changes that are going to have a positive impact on your overall health moving forward from today. Exercise is not enough, so just trying to get rid of that old school of thought we might have had where you can exercise really hard for an hour and undo everything you've done for the majority of the day. But we're finding out, you know what, even if that exercise session is really, really good, if you're sitting on the chair or not being active essentially for the next 15 hours around that, you're going to have a bit of a struggle maintaining or improving your health probably. We talked about the non-exercise activity thermogenesis, or those neat calories, so the calories that you burn throughout the day that are not related to exercise, just related to your movements with your daily activity. We talked about the standing and sitting mechanics, and that is really, really important. As we are encouraging you to move more often, we also want you to move well when you're doing that. So be conscious of your spinal position, support your spine properly. That's our core, so to speak. Our legs and our arms and our head move around. Well, mostly our legs and our arms move separately from that. But if our spine is in a good position, we can pretty much do whatever else we want with our limbs and when we're thinking about other activities. So yeah, if you do have any questions, we appreciate you checking out this online module about the active living, our active living course that we teach at the clinic. My name again is James Sauchin. If you did have any questions or concerns in relationship to this presentation, you can always feel free to give me a call. My colleague, Lindsay Ertman, also works at the office. You could always feel free to call her too if you had a few questions about this type of stuff. And she does this presentation in person as well, so she'll be very familiar with it all. Other than that, if you don't have any questions to send us, if you did enjoy this presentation or if you didn't enjoy this presentation, we do have a survey set up at the link on this slide here. So definitely helps us out if you have a chance. Again, this class was called Active Living 101, and this would be a video version of it. So let us know if hopefully we're meeting the mark for you, or if there's things we can improve. We always want to make those improvements for ourselves. So again, thank you for joining me today. If you have any questions, feel free to fire me an email or give me a call. Otherwise, if you have any comments, feel free to fill out the survey. Other than that, hopefully this was some good information for you and you'll be able to start applying this to your days starting right away and leading a more active and healthy lifestyle. All right, thank you for watching.